Hey everybody, happy Monday of Holy Week. It is a kind of a nice day outside. It's a little bit rainy, it's a little bit cool. Got to spend some time sitting on the front porch this morning, and it's been a blessing. Every day at noon this week, what we're going to be doing is spending a little bit of time reflecting on the life of Jesus, the last week of his life, from Mark's Gospel, since we've been in Mark's Gospel since the end of December. Holy Week, that's a phrase that I never heard growing up in Churches of Christ, but it's a phrase that the church has used at least since the early 300s, probably before that. There's some teaching that goes around that says, well, you know, this is kind of like Christmas. We don't really know when it happened, so we celebrate the resurrection of Jesus every day. I appreciate that sentiment, but that's not factually correct. We do know when it happened. Every year this comes around. Every year we know. The writers of the gospel don't give us a whole lot of indication when Jesus was born, but they give us very detailed, extremely detailed accounts of when and why and what happened surrounding the time of Jesus' death. They even give you on the clock the hours that it happened. And so we want to celebrate Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection every day. We want to celebrate it every Sunday, but there's something about this week that the early church found significant, that the writers of the gospel found significant. And so we're going to spend some time this week, every day at noon, just right here, really simple, just kind of reflecting for a couple of minutes on the last days of Jesus. Today, I want us to focus on something we've already looked at kind of closely, but I want us to think about just a couple of thoughts about Mark 11 and verses 15 through 19. This is in Mark's account of Holy Week. Jesus rides into town on Palm Sunday, which would be yesterday. He goes to the temple. That's where he's headed. But when he gets there, he realizes that there's not a very big crowd at all. And so he leaves the temple and goes out to the Mount of Olives for the evening. And so the next day, which would be today, Monday, he goes back to the temple courts. He curses a fig tree on the way in. Again, you can go back a couple of weeks and get a teaching on that. But he comes into the temple courts and he overturns everything. He's heralded on Sunday as the Messiah, the promised one of David, the fulfillment of all the promises. And he doesn't go and attack the Romans. He doesn't go and drive out the people who are different, who are strange, who are odd. He doesn't try to do anything political to restore an earthly kingdom. Rather, he goes and he takes care of his Father's house. He goes in and he overturns the tables of the money changers, and he specifically goes after those who are selling doves, the poverty offering at the temple. We talked a couple of weeks ago about this and about how it seems that Jesus is trying to make sure that justice is done for the least of these. The system had become to make the wealthy wealthier and the poor poorer. There was a barrier between the least of these and their ability to worship with the system. Jesus cries out that the house of God is supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations, but it had been turned into a den of robbers. A couple of thoughts on the way that Mark tells this story. The first one comes from the end of that little paragraph, verse 19, that at evening Jesus went out of the city. You know, I don't know that I could explain exactly what I've always thought that episode looks like, but I can tell you that I've never really focused on the fact that Jesus just lingered there all day, it seems. He comes into the town at some point during the morning, probably for the time of prayer. It doesn't specifically say that, but Jesus is a devout Jew. He would have been there at the time of prayer about 9 in the morning. Maybe this is when the overturning of the tables happens. But he goes in and he makes this scene and he overturns the tables and he makes this point that this system, that this temple, that this center of worship had become corrupt. That it was supposed to be all-inclusive of all nations, that anybody, regardless of their background, regardless of their situation, everybody should be free to worship. And yet the system itself was broken and was prohibiting people from doing just that. He also mentions that it's become a den of robbers, a safe place for those who are corrupt, a place for those who are just alike. Think about a den of robbers. If you ever watched old westerns, anybody was welcome as long as they were just like us, as long as they weren't after the things that we're against. And so it's a safe place for some, but it's not a safe place for all. That it's a place of acceptance for the status quo. It's a place of acceptance for those who are against what's right, what's just, what's fair. They accept each other, but they're not really concerned about anybody on the outside. Two thoughts on this. The first being that Jesus was in control. Again, I think we can understand he's in control when he's got that whip of cords in his hands and he's driving people and he's overturning tables and he's doing what he does. I think we can see that he's in control in that situation. But the fact that he would linger there until nighttime, according to verse 19, I find that interesting. That the actions of Jesus during the week are not of self-preservation. Rather, they are of making a point. I don't know if picking fights is the right word, but Jesus is certainly not avoiding confrontation. He's inviting confrontation. Because at the end of the week, Jesus knows what needs to happen, and he's more than willing to bring about the events, to create the atmosphere, to electrify the thoughts and the interactions that week to cause his death by the end of the week. He's in control. What he does is intentional. It's not a haphazard, accidental thing where the poor innocent man is put to death. No, Jesus is in control. He's bringing that about. I want us to remember that. The other thing that I want us to think about and remember at this time is that Jesus calls out condemnation on the temple system because it had become corrupt. There were things in place that were barriers to people worshiping God. That there were practices in place that were unjust, that had turned this place that should be welcoming and inviting of all people in all situations and all socioeconomic brackets, had become a system to empower the wealthy, and had become oppressive against those that should have been welcomed at the system, at the temple. Is there anything in our practices? Is there anything in our church buildings? Is there anything in the way that we do worship? Is there anything in the expectations that we have? Is there anything in the way that we individuals act that if Jesus walked in this week, he would say, this is supposed to be a house of prayer for all nations, but it's not? I don't know the answer to that. I really don't. I don't know if there's anything that we do. Is it the way that is it the time that we meet? Is it the way that we meet? Is it the expectations that we have set forward on people? One of the things about live streams this week is that I've gotten to watch a whole lot of churches that I haven't visited in a long time. I've gotten to watch churches that I've never visited. Every time we flip on the camera, we relay something about ourselves. For some, it's we need to be wearing a suit and tie even when there's nobody in the room. Is that a barrier? For those that don't have suits and ties, is that a barrier? For some, it's we need to have a snazzy light show. Is that a barrier? For some, it's projecting music on the screen that's in 4-part harmony. And if I don't know how to read music, is that a barrier? Are you telling me that if I don't know how to read music, I don't belong in worship? Just thoughts that I've had. Just ways that I've been thinking this week. Again, I don't know the answer. Maybe they are. Maybe they're not. There may be a huge barrier that you're aware of, that every time you walk into a church building, every time that you gather, this feeling hits you. I don't know what that is. But I know that the people in the temple, maybe they were aware, maybe they weren't. But there were things that were barriers to people coming to Christ, and Jesus was not okay with that. This week, as we're sitting back, as we've got time to reflect on what we normally do, and we have time to create or participate in what's the new normal, let's be sure that we're not putting up any barriers. Let's be sure that we don't turn our digital worship spaces into a den of robbers. Let's be sure that anything that we do, anything that we post on our Facebook, anything that we say to our neighbors, anything that we do, we're not putting up barriers. Rather, we are making sure that as representatives of Jesus Christ, we want to be sure that His church is a house of prayer for all. That's where my mind has gone through this week. It's really easy to sit, and it's really easy to think about Holy Week, and it's really easy to think about the doom and the gloom and the chains and the whips and the cross this week. And I do want us to think about those things because it's a reality of our sin. That what you and I choose to do in rebellion, that when we seek after our own selfish ways, that was a necessary result. But we don't have to spend all week in that mind space. I want us to think about what Jesus was thinking about. I want us to think about the love that He had for us, that He was willing to do anything for you and for me. And I want us to be willing to do anything for those who are seeking after Christ. So this week, don't spend the whole time in mourning and in sorrow. I want you to have some joy this week. I want you to do something fun. Read the book that you've wanted to read. Go take a walk. Watch that old movie that you haven't watched in a long time. My kids are on the other side of the wall watching The Wizard of Oz. And the joy that there's no place like home. And you're stuck at home. There's no place like home. Hopefully you can find some joy in having some time around the house. Or do something fun. Listen to some music. Watch a concert. Play an instrument. Bake something. Do something that you haven't done in a while. And rest in the fact that you were loved by the Savior of the world. That Jesus was willing to do what He was willing to do this week. Just for you. Rest in that fact. We'll be doing this every day at noon. It's only going to be a few minutes. I think I've been on here maybe 10 or 11 minutes now, but this is going to be our time together this week. We'll do it every day. I hope you'll join us. I hope you'll spend some time reflecting that. Read Mark 11, verses 15 through 19, and ask yourself, what stands out to you? What's Jesus trying to do? Why is He doing this? And what can we apply to our lives today? In the meantime, may the peace of the Lord Christ go with you wherever He may send you. May He guide you through the wilderness. May He protect you through the storm. May He bring you home rejoicing at the wonders He has shown you, and may He bring you home rejoicing once again into our doors. God bless. We'll see you tomorrow. Bye-bye.